Picture a kitchen built to feed an army, and then imagine that army is actually just one 9-year-old boy who has to eat in front of 6,000 people without vomiting, fainting, or crying, because if he does, half of Europe will hear about it within the month. Add to that a fish delivery gone bad in the February cold, a Lord Protector who executes men for smaller mistakes than a spoiled sturgeon, and a boy scullion with burned hands who is about to be blamed for all of it. That's Westminster, the 18th of February 1547, 2 days before the coronation of King Edward VI. A kingdom pretending its child ruler is invincible, built on the backs of people who know exactly how fragile he really is. We're going back there tonight, not to watch the crown come down on his head. We're going into the kitchens underneath it, where a boy no older than the new king himself is about to spend 3 days without real sleep, trying to keep an entire coronation feast from becoming a catastrophe that gets someone's head separated from their shoulders. Your hands find the fish before your eyes do. That's how it always goes in the dark scullery passage before dawn, groping along a trestle table by feel because the tallow candle guttered out an hour ago and nobody's replaced it. Your fingers close around something cold and slick, and for half a second it's just fish. The same fish you've been handling since you were old enough to carry a bucket. Then the smell reaches you. It's wrong. Not the clean brine and river smell of a fish pulled from cold water yesterday. This is something else. Something sweetish and rotten underneath. The smell of flesh that's begun turning, even though the outside still looks silver and whole. You've smelled death enough times working in a royal kitchen to know the difference between meat that's merely strong and meat that will kill a man if he eats enough of it. Your stomach drops somewhere down around your worn-through boots. 200 sturgeon. Bought at a price that would keep your whole family fed for a year, if you had a family left to feed, hauled up from the coast in barrels of brine and ice over 3 days of frozen roads, meant to be the centrepiece of the second remove at the coronation banquet of King Edward VI. And somewhere in that journey, in some barrel packed wrong or some cart left too long in a warmer stretch of road, at least some of them have started to rot. You don't know how many, that's the problem. You've got one fish in your hands in the pitch dark and 40 more barrels stacked in the cold larder beyond, and no way to check them all before Master Hobden arrives and finds out whether you've done your work or not. Your name is Robin Sharp. You're 13 years old, an orphan boy from Southwark who's spent the last 3 years as the lowest scullion in the king's kitchens, and right now, in the dark, holding a fish that could get someone executed for treasonous negligence against the crown, you understand with total clarity that this is the worst morning of your entire short life. You set the fish down very carefully, as if it might explode, and you go looking for a light. The kitchens of Westminster in the days before a coronation are not like the kitchens of Westminster on any ordinary day, and ordinary days are already loud enough to deafen a country boy fresh off the road. What's happening now, in these final 2 days before the crowning of a king, is something closer to a battle preparation than a supper being cooked. 300 cooks and their boys are crammed into a warren of rooms that were never meant to hold this many bodies at once. The great kitchen itself, with its 2 fireplaces each big enough to roast a whole ox, and still leave room for a man to stand upright inside them, and beyond that the boiling house, the pastry house, the spicery, the larder, the scalding house where the poultry gets its feathers stripped, the wet larder for the fish, and the long covered yard where the wood is stacked higher than a house. You find a taper still burning in the boiling house and carry it back cupped in your hand, the flame throwing shadows that jump and stretch along the walls with every step you take. The scullery passage is narrow enough that your shoulders nearly brush both sides. Stone walls slick with damp that never quite dries out even in the height of summer. And now, in February, cold enough that your breath fogs in front of your face and your fingers have gone half numb around the taper's wax. You reach the wet larder and hold the light up over the barrels. 40 of them, stacked 3 high, each one packed with brine and ice and sturgeon flesh, each one worth more money than you will earn in your entire apprenticeship. You start with the one nearest, working your fingers down through the crust of ice at the top, feeling for the fish beneath, pulling one free to hold up to the light. It looks fine. Firm flesh, the scales still catching what little light there is. No smell beyond the ordinary brine stink of a fish larder. You move to the next barrel, and the next. By the 4th barrel, your fingers have gone from numb to actually painful, deep, aching cold that makes your knuckles feel like they belong to someone else, and you still haven't found the source of that first bad smell. You keep going anyway, because stopping means someone finds the rot before you do, and someone finding it before you do means someone asking why the scullion responsible for the wet larder didn't catch it himself. You find the barrel on your 9th try. The smell hits you before your hand does. That same sweetish wrongness rising up out of the ice the moment you break the crust. And when you pull a fish free, it comes apart slightly in your grip, flesh gone soft where it should be firm, the belly discoloured in a way no amount of candlelight can hide once you know what you're looking at. You stand there in the cold with a rotting fish in your hands and you understand, with the particular clarity that comes to people who are about to be in very serious trouble, that you have maybe an hour before Master Hobden arrives to inspect the larder himself, and that an hour is nowhere near enough time to sort 40 barrels of sturgeon by hand in the dark. So you do the only thing you can do. You start working faster. Master Hobden is the King's Sergeant of the larder, a title that sounds grand enough until you understand it means he is personally answerable, with his own body and his own neck, for the quality of every piece of fish, flesh and fowl that reaches the royal table. He is a wide, red-faced man in his 50s who has served 3 different monarchs in this same kitchen and has the burn scars and the missing fingertip to prove it, and he does not tolerate excuses, explanations, or anything that sounds even slightly like a boy trying to talk his way out of blame. You've seen him dismiss boys for less than what you're about to tell him. You've seen him take a leather strap to hands that weren't even his to punish, on the theory that pain teaches faster than words. You are, at this moment, more afraid of Master Hobden's reaction than you are of the actual crime of serving bad fish to a king, which tells you something about your own priorities that you don't have time to examine right now. You work through barrel after barrel, sorting good fish into one pile and bad into another, and the pile of bad grows faster than you want it to. By the time grey light starts leaking through the high, narrow windows of the larder, you've gone through 30 of the 40 barrels, and you've found rot in 6 of them. Enough spoiled sturgeon stacked in the corner to feed a fair-sized village if anyone were desperate enough to eat it. Your hands are raw. The cold and the brine together have cracked the skin across your knuckles into thin red lines that sting every time you flex your fingers, and there's a dull ache running up both forearms from 3 hours of lifting and sorting and lifting again. You haven't eaten since the evening before. Your stomach has stopped complaining about it and settled into a kind of hollow silence that you recognize as familiar from other long working nights. You hear the door at the far end of the larder swing open, and heavy footsteps coming toward you, and you know, without turning around, that it's Master Hobden, arrived exactly on schedule to find out whether the boy responsible for his fish has done his job. "Well," he says, and his voice fills the whole narrow room. "What have we here?" You turn around, holding a rotten fish in each hand like some kind of grotesque offering, and you watch his face change as he takes in the pile behind you. The good fish sorted neatly to one side, the bad heaped in the corner, and you brace yourself for whatever comes next. What comes next surprises you. Master Hobden walks past you without a word and crouches down beside the spoiled pile, picking up one fish after another, turning them over, smelling them, muttering something under his breath that might be a curse or might be a prayer. He does this for what feels like a very long time while you stand there with your raw hands and your empty stomach and wait to find out whether you're about to be beaten or worse. Finally he stands up and looks at you properly for the first time. "Who found this?" "I did, sir." "When?" "Before dawn, sir. I smelled it before I could see it." He's quiet for a moment, and you watch him doing sums in his head. The same kind of sums you've watched him do 100 times before, over questions of quantity and cost and what will and won't stretch, to feed the numbers he's been told to feed. 34 barrels, good, he says finally. That's enough if we're careful with the portions and heavy with the sauce. It'll have to be. He looks at the pile of bad fish again, and something crosses his face that you don't have a word for yet. Something between relief and fury. If you hadn't caught this boy, do you understand what happens? Not to me, to you, to every soul in this kitchen. A king eats bad fish at his own coronation feast, and it's not a fine, it's not a beating. Someone answers for that with their neck. You understand. You've understood for 3 hours now, ever since your fingers first closed around that first wrong-smelling fish in the dark. "Get this filth out of my larder," Master Hobden says, already turning away, already moving on to the next crisis in a morning that is clearly going to be full of them. "And then get some bread in you before you fall over. I need you standing for the next 2 days, not lying dead on my floor." It's the closest thing to praise you have ever received from him, and you carry the memory of it with you as you haul the rotten fish out through the yard to the midden heap, your arms trembling with the effort, your breath coming in short clouds in the cold morning air. You don't know it yet, standing there in the grey dawn light with dead fish stacked at your feet, and the ache of a sleepless night settling into your bones. But this is only the beginning. This is the smallest crisis of the 2 days ahead of you, the first small stone in an avalanche that's going to bury the entire kitchen in work, so relentless it will make this morning feel in retrospect like a rest. Somewhere above you, in rooms you will never enter, men are deciding exactly how a 9-year-old boy will be crowned King of England. And somewhere below, in rooms like this one, boys like you are the reason any of it will actually happen. You eat your bread standing up, leaning against the warm brick of the boiling house wall, because sitting down feels dangerous right now, like your legs might not agree to stand back up again once you let them fold. The bread is coarse and a little stale, but it's food, and your stomach stops its hollow complaining the moment the first mouthful hits it. Around you, the kitchen has woken into full motion. The old king died 3 weeks ago. Henry VIII, dead in his own bed at Whitehall on the 28th of January, so swollen with sickness by the end that 6 men were needed to shift him, though nobody in this kitchen says that part out loud where it might be overheard and reported. What everyone does say, over and over, in low voices between the clatter of pots, is that England has a king again already, a new one, and he is 9 years old, and in 2 days he will be crowned in Westminster Abbey and then fed, along with several thousand of his closest subjects, in the great hall next door. You've seen the boy king exactly once, from a distance, when his household passed through the outer yard on some errand you weren't important enough to know the reason for. He looked smaller than you expected. Pale, serious-faced, dressed in clothes so heavy with jewels and fur that you wondered how a child that size could even stand upright under the weight of them. He didn't smile. You got the sense, watching him for those few seconds before his attendants hurried him along, that smiling wasn't really something anyone had taught him was permitted. They say the ceremony itself has been shortened, cut down from what it would normally be, because a boy that age can't be expected to stand through hours of Latin and ritual without collapsing. The Archbishop, a careful, quiet man named Cranmer who you've glimpsed moving through the kitchen yard on his way to some other business entirely, is said to have argued for the shortening himself, and the man who will really run the kingdom, at least until the boy grows into it, is his uncle, the Duke of Somerset, who has taken the title of Lord Protector, and who is, by every account you've heard whispered in this kitchen, not a man who forgives failure easily. None of that history matters much to your hands right now. What matters is the work in front of you, and there is an almost unbelievable amount of it. Master Hobden puts you on birds after your bread is finished, because someone needs to help the poultry boys and you're standing there upright and available, which in this kitchen is basically the same thing as volunteering. The scalding house is its own particular kind of misery. A vat of water kept just below boiling sits in the centre of the room, and the smell that rises off it, wet feathers, hot flesh, the sharp mineral tang of blood, coats the inside of your nose within minutes of walking through the door. You take your place at a long trestle table beside two other boys you half recognise from other kitchen duties, and someone hands you a swan. The swan is already dead, already had its neck wrung by someone else earlier this morning, but it's still warm, still heavy in a way that live things are heavy, and dead things somehow aren't quite. Not yet. Your job is simple in description and brutal in execution. Dunk the bird in the scalding water to loosen the feathers, then pluck it clean, fast enough that the water doesn't cool and the bird doesn't get cold enough for the feathers to set back in tight. Your fingers, already raw from 3 hours of sorting fish in cold brine, now go to work pulling wet feathers free of hot, slippery skin, and within 10 minutes they're aching in an entirely new way, a burning soreness at each fingertip where the quills catch and pull against torn skin. The feathers stick to your hands, your forearms, the front of your apron, fine down drifting up into the air every time you shake a handful loose, catching in your eyelashes, your throat, making you cough, even as you keep working because stopping to cough properly would mean falling behind. 60 swans need dressing for the feast. 60 plus 200 capons, plus cranes and herons and peacocks reserved for the grandest dishes, plus more common fowl than you can easily count. All of it needing the same treatment, hour after hour, boy after boy bent over the same trestle tables, with the same raw fingers and the same feathers drifting through the air like a strange indoor snow. The peacocks are the worst and the most important, because a peacock at a feast like this one isn't simply eaten, it's redressed. Once the bird is cooked, the skin and feathers, carefully removed whole before cooking and set aside, are sewn back over the roasted carcass, so that when it arrives at the high table, it appears to be a living, gleaming, impossibly beautiful bird standing proud on the platter, its tail fanned out behind it, sometimes with a bit of wool soaked in spirits tucked into its beak, and set alight so that it seems to breathe fire as it's carried in. You've watched this trick done before, in smaller kitchens for smaller feasts, but never at this scale, never with the stakes this high. The master who handles the peacock skins works at his own table in the corner, a wiry old man named Perrin who's been doing this particular job for 30 years and who guards his skinning knife like it's a holy relic. You catch a glimpse of his work as you pass with an armload of plucked swans, the delicate care of it, easing skin and plumage away from the carcass in one unbroken piece. The way his hands move slow and sure where everyone else's move fast and rough. That's the difference, Master Hobden says, appearing at your shoulder without warning the way he seems to do throughout the day, materializing wherever a boy might be tempted to slow down. Between what feeds a man and what feeds a king, the meat's the same underneath. It's what you do with the outside that costs the money. You think about that while you work, about how much of this entire enormous effort, the swans, the peacocks, the gilding you've heard is planned for some of the pastry work, the sugar sculptures being built somewhere in the confectionery you haven't been allowed near yet, is really about making things look impossible rather than making them taste good. A boar's head, you've heard, is being prepared for the high table with its tusks gilded in real gold leaf and an apple set flaming in its jaws. Underneath the gold and the fire, it's still just a dead pig's head. But nobody at the high table is meant to think about that part. By midday, your back aches in a low, constant way that you've stopped noticing as pain exactly, and started experiencing more like weather, condition you're simply inside of rather than something happening to you specifically. Your hands are a mess of small cuts and burns and raw patches, the kind of hands that every scullion in this kitchen has by the end of a normal week, let alone a coronation week. You've eaten twice more, both times standing, both times bread and small beer swallowed in a handful of minutes before being called back to some other task. The spicery, when you're finally sent there in the afternoon to help grind, is at least warmer and cleaner than the scalding house, though it brings its own kind of misery. Cinnamon and cloves and grains of paradise and sugar loaves the size of your torso, all of it needing to be broken down and ground fine enough for sauces and subtleties and the endless spiced wines that will flow at the feast. The mortar you're given is heavy stone, and the pestle heavier still, and after 20 minutes of grinding cinnamon bark your shoulder burns with an ache that travels all the way down into your wrist. The smell in here is almost pleasant, at least, a change from feathers and fish and blood, warm and sweet and sharp all at once, clinging to your clothes and your hair in a way that will still be there tomorrow, you know from experience, faint traces of cinnamon dust in the creases of your knuckles for days after a job like this. A boy across the table from you, younger than you by a year or two, keeps sneezing every few minutes from the fine spice dust hanging in the air, and every time he does, the older apprentice supervising the spicery cuffs him lightly across the back of the head and tells him to cover his mouth, that a spiceman's sneeze in the wrong direction can waste more sugar than the boy earns in a month. And how much longer, the younger boy asks you quietly, during a pause while someone fetches more cinnamon bark from the store, until it's over. You don't have an answer for him. You don't fully know yourself. You know the coronation is the day after tomorrow and the feast follows directly after, and you know that everything between now and then is simply more of this, hour after hour, task after task, until your body has been asked to do more than you thought it capable of and then asked to keep going anyway. Not long, you tell him, because it's what someone told you once. On your own first brutal week in this kitchen, and because sometimes a lie that sounds like comfort is worth more than the truth. He goes back to grinding, so do you. Outside, somewhere beyond these thick stone walls, the city of London is filling up with people who've travelled for days or weeks to see a boy crowned king, and inside, in this hot, spice-scented room, you grind cinnamon until your shoulder screams, and the light through the high windows goes from grey to gold to the deep blue of early evening, and still there is more to do. Supper, when it finally comes, is taken standing in the scullery passage. A bowl of pottage thick with barley, and the odd scrap of meat too small or too damaged for the high table, eaten quickly with a horn spoon that's been yours since your first week here. You share the passage with a dozen other boys in the same condition as you, hollow-eyed, feather-dusted, cinnamon-scented, moving with the particular stiffness of people whose bodies have simply agreed to keep functioning a while longer out of necessity rather than any real reserve of strength. One of them is a boy named Piers Waldie, older than you by 2 years, who's worked the confectionery bench for most of the day, and who has, tucked inside his shirt where Master Hobden won't see it, a small broken piece of something he's willing to share if you keep quiet about where it came from. Marchpane, he says, breaking off a corner and pressing it into your palm. Off the cutting scraps. Nobody counts the scraps. It's sweet in a way that makes your teeth ache after a day of nothing but bread and pottage. Almond paste worked with sugar until it's smooth as wax, and you eat it slowly, trying to make the taste last, while Piers tells you what he's seen in the confectionery that afternoon. They're building a castle, he says. Sugar and pastework, taller than a man, meant to sit on the table during the last course. Got towers on it, and little painted flags, and inside there's supposed to be birds that fly out when they cut it open. Birds, you repeat. Live ones. Small ones, wrens maybe, shut up inside a pastry shell until someone cuts it and lets them loose over the high table. He shakes his head, not quite believing his own description even as he gives it. Master Allard's been building it for a week, says if it collapses before it reaches the king's table, he might as well throw himself in the Thames and save the Protector the trouble of dealing with him after. You think about that while you finish the marchpane, about a grown man, a master confectioner with decades of skill in his hands staking his life, or at least his livelihood, which in a kitchen like this can amount to nearly the same thing, on a sugar castle surviving a walk across a crowded hall without crumbling. You seen the boy king yet? Piers asks. Up close, I mean, not just through a doorway. Once. From a distance. I saw him this morning. Passed right by the kitchen yard on his way somewhere with 6 men trailing after him. Piers lowers his voice, even though there's no one nearby who'd care to listen. Skinny little thing, face like he hasn't slept right in weeks. One of the grooms was saying he barely eats. Picks at his food, has to be coaxed by his tutors, and even then it's mostly bread and a bit of fruit. 9 years old and being fed by physicians same as if he was an invalid. You file this piece of information away without quite knowing why it matters, except that something about it snags at you, the way a splinter snags at cloth. A kitchen full of hundreds of people breaking their bodies to feed a boy who apparently can barely be persuaded to eat at all. Doesn't matter what he wants, Piers says, as if reading the thought off your face. Matters what gets served. Matters what the ambassadors see. What gets written down and sent off to France and Spain and wherever else. The king could eat nothing but bread and water, and they'd still need the swans and the peacocks and the sugar castle. Because it's not really about feeding him, is it? It's about showing everyone watching that England's still England, crown or no crown, boy or man sitting under it. It's the most anyone has explained to you in 3 years of scullion work about why any of this actually matters, and you carry it with you as you finish your pottage and head toward the loft above the boiling house, where the youngest kitchen boys sleep in a row on thin pallets, packed close enough together for warmth that you can hear every one of your neighbours breathing. Sleep doesn't come easily, even exhausted as you are. Your hands throb in time with your pulse, a dozen small cuts and burns, each announcing themselves in turn, and your shoulder aches from the grinding, and somewhere below you the kitchen never really stops. Night crews taking over from day crews, the low murmur of voices and the clatter of pans drifting up through the floorboards even in the deepest part of the night. You think about the fish, about how close you came to disaster before the sun was even properly up. You think about the sugar castle balanced on the edge of collapse. You think about a boy king who doesn't eat and doesn't smile and is about to be crowned in front of the entire world, while boys like you and peers work themselves past exhaustion to make sure nothing goes wrong in front of him. Eventually, despite everything, sleep takes you anyway, the way it always does when a body's been pushed far enough. You don't dream, or if you do, you don't remember it. There's only the sensation of closing your eyes in darkness and opening them again what feels like moments later to someone shaking your shoulder, telling you it's time to get up, that today is the day the king rides through London, and there's work to be done before the procession even begins. The morning of the 19th of February arrives cold and clear, the kind of hard, bright cold that makes your breath hang visible in front of you and turns every puddle in the kitchen yard to a thin skin of ice that cracks satisfyingly under your boots. You're given a rare, strange gift this morning, an hour of freedom granted by Master Hobden himself, who tells you and a handful of other boys that the worst of the feast preparation can wait an hour, that a boy ought to see his king crowned in the streets even if he never gets close enough to see anything but a flash of velvet and gold. You've never been granted anything like this before. You take it without questioning whether it might be withdrawn. The streets of London on the morning the boy king rides from the Tower to Westminster are more crowded than you've ever seen them, more crowded than you imagined a city could be, and still function, still let people breathe and move and see. You wedge yourself into a gap between a fishmonger's wife and a pair of apprentices from some other trade entirely, craning to see over shoulders and around the brims of hats, and you wait, along with what feels like the entire population of England, for a glimpse of the boy who will be king by tomorrow evening. The wait stretches on for what feels like hours, the crowd growing denser and louder around you. Vendors work in the edges selling meat pies and roasted chestnuts to people who've been standing since before dawn to secure their spot. Children hoisted onto shoulders, old women pushing forward with elbows sharp as knives. Somewhere nearby, a fight breaks out over a good vantage point and is broken up almost as quickly as it started, everyone too eager for the procession to waste much time on a squabble. Then a murmur runs through the crowd like wind through a field, a rippling motion of heads turning all in the same direction, and you hear it before you see it. Trumpets, and the low rolling thunder of hundreds of horses' hooves on packed earth, and beneath that, a swelling roar of voices as the procession comes into view at the far end of the street. It takes what feels like forever for it to actually reach you. Lords and knights and bishops pass first, an endless river of velvet and fur and polished armour, banners snapping in the cold wind, each rider more richly dressed than the last, and you understand, watching it, that this single procession probably represents more wealth passing through this one street than your entire life will ever touch. Then, finally, surrounded by a guard so dense you can barely see through the gaps between horses. The boy king himself. He's dressed in white and silver, a small figure made smaller by the enormous horse beneath him and the enormous crowd around him. And even from this distance, even glimpsed only in fragments between the shifting bodies of his escort, you can see that Piers was right. His face is pale and serious, his mouth set in a thin line that doesn't look like excitement or joy, doesn't look like anything you'd expect from a child on the best day of his life. He looks, more than anything, like a boy who has been told exactly how to sit and exactly how to hold his hands and exactly what expression to keep on his face, and who is following those instructions with the careful precision of someone who understands, even at 9 years old, that failure here would not be forgiven. The crowd around you roars its approval anyway, hats thrown into the air, voices raised in a wave of noise that rolls along the street ahead of the procession and follows it after, and you find yourself shouting along with everyone else, caught up in something you don't fully understand but feel anyway, a current of hope and relief that a kingdom which lost its old king only weeks ago has somehow, impossibly, produced a new one already, small and pale and serious as he is. The procession takes what feels like another hour to fully pass, and by the time the last of the guard has moved on toward Westminster, your feet have gone numb with cold, and your voice is hoarse from shouting, and somewhere in the crowd behind you, you hear someone say that tomorrow, after the crowning itself, there will be a feast in Westminster Hall, grander than anything London has seen in a generation. You already know that. You've spent the last 2 days with your hands raw from preparing it. You make your way back to the kitchens through streets still buzzing with the residue of the procession, past taverns already filling with people eager to drink to the health of the new king, past a printer's shop with a hastily made woodcut of the boy in the window, already for sale, already being purchased by people who want a keepsake of the day. Whatever image of majesty and confidence the boy was dressed and positioned to project this morning, you know something none of the cheering crowd knows. You know how much work stands between now and tomorrow's feast succeeding. You know how close the fish came to disaster before the sun was even up. You know, in a way the crowd doesn't, exactly how much this single day is going to cost the people who build it, invisible and unthanked, behind the walls of the kitchen you're walking back toward right now. The hour of freedom ends the moment you cross back into the kitchen yard. Master Hobden finds you within minutes, hands you a fresh apron to replace the one gone stiff with feather grease and fish brine, and puts you straight onto the evening's work, which turns out to be the sauces. Sauces for a feast this size are made in enormous cauldrons, thick with butter and wine and the ground spices you spent yesterday afternoon breaking down by hand, and your job is simple and endless. Stir and keep stirring, so nothing catches on the bottom and scorches, because a scorched sauce means the whole batch is ruined and there isn't time to make it again. The wooden paddle is nearly as long as you are tall, and after an hour your arms have gone from aching to trembling, a fine tremor you have to fight to control every time you drag the paddle through the thick liquid. The heat from the fire beneath the cauldron is a different kind of misery than the cold of the wet larder or the scalding house. A dry, relentless heat that makes sweat run down your back, even as your face feels like it's being slowly cooked, and the steam rising off the sauce carries the sharp bite of vinegar and the warm sweetness of cinnamon and cloves in a combination that would smell wonderful if you weren't already sick to death of smelling it after 2 straight days. A cook named Allard. The same Master Allard, you realise, whom Piers mentioned building the sugar castle, passes through the sauce room partway through the evening, checking on a smaller pot set aside for some purpose you're not senior enough to know, and you catch a glimpse of his hands as he works. Fine-boned, quick, marked with dozens of small burn scars from what must be years of exactly this kind of careful, precise labour. He doesn't speak to you. Master confectioners don't generally speak to scullery boys unless there's a specific reason to. But you watch him for the few minutes he's in the room, fascinated despite your exhaustion by the contrast between his careful, almost delicate movements and the brute physical labour happening everywhere else around him. Later, well after dark, you're sent with a message and a basket of spun sugar decorations to the confectionery itself, and for the first time you get to see the castle Piers described. It's extraordinary. Taller than a grown man, built up in layers of pastry and hardened sugar paste work to look like carved stone, complete with crenellated battlements and slender towers, and a gatehouse with a portcullis rendered in fine strands of spun sugar, all of it painted in colours so vivid they seem to glow in the candlelight. Gold and crimson, and a deep blue that Master Allard tells one of his assistants, without looking up from his work, cost more per ounce than the sugar itself. You stand in the doorway holding your basket, forgotten for a moment, and watch three men working around the castle with a kind of tense concentration you associate with soldiers before a battle. One of them is applying gold leaf to a tiny pastry flag no bigger than your thumbnail, his hand perfectly steady despite what must be exhaustion as deep as your own. Another is checking the structure's joints, testing with careful pressure whether the pastework will hold under the vibration of being carried through a crowded hall tomorrow. The third, Master Allard himself, is simply standing back, arms crossed, staring at the whole construction with an expression you recognise because you've worn it yourself over the past 2 days. The particular tiredness of someone who has poured everything they have into a thing that could still, despite all of it, fail. "Boy," he says, without turning around, somehow aware of you standing there even though you haven't made a sound. "Set that down and come here." You set the basket down carefully and approach, and he points to a section near the base of the nearest tower, where a hairline crack has appeared in the sugar paste, thin as a thread but visible if you know to look for it. "Tell me what you see." You look closer. "A crack, sir, near the base, where the weight sits heaviest." He crouches down to examine it more closely himself, close enough that his breath must be warming the sugar. If that widens even a hair's width more before tomorrow, the whole tower goes when they lift it onto the serving board, and if the tower goes, the birds inside go with it before they're meant to, and there is no version of that happening in front of the boy king, and every foreign ambassador in England that ends well for anyone standing near this table when it does. He doesn't seem to be talking to you exactly, more thinking aloud in your general direction, but you find yourself answering anyway, some instinct telling you that silence here would be worse than a wrong answer. "Could you brace it, sir? Underneath, where it wouldn't show." He looks at you properly for the first time, a flicker of something that might be surprise crossing his tired face. "That's exactly what I intend to do." He reaches for a thin rod of hardened sugarwork, clearly prepared for exactly this contingency, and begins working it carefully into the gap beneath the tower's base, invisible once it's in place, a hidden support holding up something that's meant to look effortless and perfect to everyone who never sees the crack at all. You watch him work for a few more minutes before he remembers you're still standing there and sends you back to your own duties with a curt nod that you choose to interpret as thanks. Walking back through the darkened passages toward the sauce room, you find yourself thinking about that hidden brace. The sugar rod supporting a weight it was never meant to carry. Invisible to everyone who'll see only the finished castle tomorrow and never know how close it came to collapse tonight. It strikes you in the particular way exhausted thoughts sometimes strike deeper than they have any right to. That the whole kitchen is full of exactly this kind of invisible bracing. Your own raw hands sorting rotten fish before dawn, Master Allard's steady fingers applying gold leaf to a pastry flag, 100 small unseen efforts holding up something that's supposed to look effortless to everyone watching from outside. It's on your way back through the larder, taking a shortcut past the wet stores to avoid a crowded passage, that you find the spoon. It's lying half hidden beneath a shelf, clearly dropped and forgotten by someone in the chaos of the past 2 days. And when you pick it up, you realize immediately that it doesn't belong down here at all. It's silver, or silver enough to catch what little light there is with a soft gleam, small and finely made, its handle worked into the shape of a rose. And you understand without being told that this is not kitchen equipment. This is the kind of spoon that belongs on a table you'll never sit at, dropped and lost by some steward or server carrying a tray through the wrong passage at the wrong moment. You should hand it in. You know you should. Master Hobden, or whoever oversees the king's plate and silver, would want to know it's been found, would want it returned to wherever it's meant to be before it's noticed missing, and someone gets blamed for the loss. But your hand closes around it anyway, and you slip it into the inside pocket of your apron, and you tell yourself you'll turn it in tomorrow, once the immediate crisis of tonight's work has passed, once there's a quiet moment to explain how you found it without sounding like you were trying to steal it in the first place. It's a small lie you tell yourself, and you know it's a lie even as you're telling it, but the spoon stays in your pocket, a small cold weight against your ribs as you make your way back to the sauce room and pick up your paddle again, and somewhere underneath the exhaustion and the ache in your arms, a new and different kind of worry has settled in alongside all the others. The stirring continues past midnight. Somewhere in the small hours, Master Hobden finally releases you and the other sauce boys to sleep, warning you that tomorrow, today really, since it's already well past midnight, will be the hardest day yet, that the coronation itself happens in the morning and the feast follows directly after, and that every single person in this kitchen needs to be at their absolute best from the moment they wake until long after most of London has gone home satisfied and full. You climb back to the loft above the boiling house on legs that barely want to carry you, the spoon still tucked against your ribs, and you lie down on your thin pallet without even bothering to remove your apron, and you're asleep within moments, too exhausted even to worry properly about what you've done, though the worry is still there, waiting for you, when your eyes open again a few hours later into the grey light of Coronation Day. The 20th of February begins before the sky has any real light in it at all, a hand shaking your shoulder in the dark and a voice telling you there's no time for bread this morning, that you're needed in the great kitchen immediately, that the ovens have been going since well before midnight and the first roast need turning before they scorch. Your body protests every movement as you swing off your pallet, muscles that spent yesterday plucking swans and grinding spice and hauling sauce paddles now stiff and slow to respond, your raw hands aching the moment you flex your fingers. You pull your apron straight. The spoon is still there, a small hard shape against your ribs that you'd almost forgotten in your sleep and now remember all at once, with a fresh stab of guilty worry, and you follow the other boys down toward the great kitchen, where the heat hits you like a wall the moment you step through the door. Both enormous fireplaces are roaring at full capacity, each one large enough to walk into standing upright, spits turning slowly with the weight of entire oxen, and rows of smaller birds threaded along iron rods, and the men working the fires are stripped down to their shirts despite the February cold outside, sweat running freely down faces lit orange by the flames. The noise in here is its own kind of assault, the crackle and spit of fat dropping into the fire, the grinding creak of the spit mechanisms, dozens of voices shouting instructions and corrections over the roar of the flames, and beneath all of it, a low continuous hum that you realize after a moment is simply the sound of hundreds of people moving through cramped stone rooms with total purpose and no room for hesitation. You're set to work on the spits, a job that consists of turning the handle at a steady pace hour after hour, while a boy your own age wields a long-handled ladle, basting the meat with drippings caught in a pan below, and the two of you fall into a rhythm without needing to discuss it. Turn and baste, turn and baste. The fire scorching the front of your body, while the February draft from the yard door keeps your back cold, so that you exist for hours at a time in two different temperatures simultaneously. The heat makes your eyes water and your throat roar. Fat spits and pops from the pan, occasionally landing on your bare forearm with a small vicious sting that you've learned, over 3 years in this kitchen, not to react to beyond a sharp intake of breath. Because reacting more than that means losing your rhythm, and losing your rhythm means the meat above you starts to scorch on one side. Somewhere outside, beyond the thick stone walls, bells begin to ring across the whole city, a great swelling peal that starts at Westminster Abbey and seems to spread outward, tower after tower picking it up in turn, until the sound of it reaches even down here into the kitchen's roar, a thin high note woven through the crackle of the fires. "That's it," someone says, passing behind you with an armload of trenchers. "He's crowned. It's done." You keep turning your spit. Whatever's happening in the abbey right now, the boy king kneeling before the altar, the crown lowered onto his head, the ancient words spoken over him that make him ruler of everything you can see, and much that you can't. None of it changes the work in front of you. If anything, the bells mean the opposite of a pause. The bells mean the ceremony's nearly finished, which means the procession back to Westminster Hall will begin soon, which means the feast that follows is now only hours away instead of a whole day, and the pace in the kitchen, which you would not have believed could increase further, somehow does exactly that. Master Hobden moves through the kitchen like a man conducting some enormous chaotic orchestra, correcting a sauce here, checking the colour of a roast there, sending runners to the confectionery to check on the castle's progress, sending others to the wet larder to confirm the fish is being properly prepared. He passes you twice without stopping, and the third time he pauses just long enough to check the colour of the meat on your spit, nod once, and move on. You've learned, over the past 3 days, to read approval into the smallest gestures, because that's all this kitchen has time to offer. A nod is praise. Silence is acceptable. A sharp word is the only real feedback that gets spoken aloud, reserved for genuine mistakes. By mid-morning, word starts filtering back through the kitchen from the servers and stewards who've been up in Westminster Hall itself, setting the tables and preparing the space for the feast that will follow the procession's return. The hall, they say, has been transformed. Long tables stretch the entire length of the enormous space, draped in white linen, set with more silver and pewter than most of the boys in this kitchen will see again in their entire lives. A raised dais at the far end holds the high table, where the boy king will sit beneath a canopy of state, flanked by the great lords of the realm, while below him, arranged by careful gradations of rank that you don't fully understand and never will, sit everyone else who matters enough to have been invited. You're sent partway through the morning to help carry trays of prepared items up toward the hall itself, and this is the first time you've actually seen the space you've been cooking for these past 3 days, and it stops you in your tracks for a moment despite the tray balanced in your hands and the steward behind you hissing at you to keep moving. Westminster Hall is enormous in a way that's difficult to hold in your mind even standing directly inside it. The roof arches overhead in a series of great wooden beams carved and painted rising so high above the floor that the people working beneath it look almost like children's toys scattered across an impossibly large room. Sunlight slants down through high windows, catching motes of dust and the faint haze of smoke drifting up from the braziers set along the walls to warm the space. And everywhere you look, servants and stewards move with the same frantic purpose you've felt all morning in the kitchen, setting the last of the silver, adjusting the hang of tapestries, testing the stability of the high table's canopy. You set your tray down where you're directed and are hurried back out before you can take in much more than the general shape and scale of it. But the image stays with you as you return to the kitchen's heat and noise. All of that space, all of that silver and linen and carved wood, waiting empty right now, waiting to be filled within hours by thousands of people who will eat everything you and every other exhausted, aching body in this kitchen has spent 3 days preparing. Back in the great kitchen, the pace has become something almost beyond description. Every surface is covered in food in some stage of preparation. Roasts being carved into serving portions, sauces being ladled into silver boats, jellies being turned out of their moulds onto platters and arranged into elaborate shapes, whole fish being dressed and garnished, pies being cut open to check their fillings, and everywhere, running between all of it, boys like you carrying trays and fetching ingredients and hauling water and doing the 1,000 small physical tasks that make the larger operation possible. You catch a glimpse of Piers across the room, his face flushed red from heat, his hands moving fast and sure as he helps arrange a platter of small pastries into a precise geometric pattern under the watchful eye of an older cook. He catches your eye for a second and gives you a quick, exhausted grin before turning back to his work, and something about that small moment of shared recognition, 2 boys who've survived 3 days of this together, steadies you more than you expect it to. The spoon is still in your apron pocket. You've thought about it a dozen times throughout the morning, each time telling yourself you'll deal with it once things calm down, and each time watching things fail to calm down even slightly. It sits there against your ribs, a small, nagging guilt you don't have time to properly examine, buried under the much larger and more immediate pressures of the work in front of you. Word comes through the kitchen just past midday that the procession has left the abbey, that the boy king, now properly crowned, is being carried back toward Westminster Hall in a litter. Too small and too young, someone says, to be expected to walk the whole distance in his heavy robes after everything he's already endured this morning, and that the feast will begin the moment he's seated. Master Hobden's voice cuts through the kitchen's roar like a blade. Final positions! Everyone to their stations! We serve within the hour! And just like that, 3 days of preparation collapses down into the single, narrow window of time that actually matters, the hour in which everything you've built, the fish sorted from rot, the swans and peacocks dressed and redressed, the sauces stirred until your arms trembled, the sugar castle braced against its hidden crack, either succeeds in front of the entire watching world, or fails in front of it. You wipe your raw hands on your apron, feel the small hard shape of the stolen spoon shift against your ribs, and take your place at the pass-through window, where finished dishes are handed off to the servers who'll carry them up into the hall, and you wait, along with everyone else in this enormous, exhausted, sweating kitchen, for the coronation feast of King Edward VI to actually begin. The first course leaves the kitchen like a wave breaking. You've never seen the pass-through window handle this volume of traffic, dish after dish lifted from waiting hands and carried up the narrow stone stairs toward the hall by servers moving in a continuous disciplined stream. And your job, along with a dozen other boys, is simply to keep the dishes coming fast enough that the stream never breaks, wiping platter rims clean of drips, arranging garnish that's shifted during the short journey from cauldron to counter, passing everything forward the moment it's ready. The boar's head goes first, because tradition demands it lead the procession, and you catch a glimpse of it as it passes. An enormous head, boiled and roasted and dressed until the skin gleams dark gold, its tusks wrapped in gold leaf that catches the torchlight, a whole apple set flaming in its jaws, the fire small and controlled but still startling to see moving through a crowded room, smoke trailing behind it like a small procession all its own. Behind it comes a swan, redressed in its own white plumage the way Master Perrin promised, standing improbably upright on its serving platter as though it might simply climb down and walk away, its beak gilded, a small crown of gold leaf worked around its neck in mockery or homage to the crown just placed on the boy king's own head an hour before. You hear, filtering back down through the stairwell in fragments carried by returning servers, some sense of what's happening above. The king's champion, they say, a knight in full armour mounted on a horse specially trained for the purpose, has ridden directly into the hall itself, right up between the tables, to issue the ancient challenge that any man who denies Edward's right to the crown should come forward and answer for it in single combat, right here, right now, in front of the assembled nobility of England. Nobody comes forward, of course. Nobody ever does. But the ritual demands it be asked anyway. The challenge shouted 3 times through the enormous space, while the boy king watches from his canopy, and you find yourself picturing it as you work. An armoured knight on horseback inside a room full of feasting nobles, a threat of violence performed as ceremony, a reminder wrapped in pageantry that the crown on a 9-year-old's head is not something anyone is meant to question. Not today, not ever. The fish course follows soon after, and your stomach tightens involuntarily as you watch the sturgeon go past, remembering your hands in the dark 2 mornings ago, the cold brine, the smell of rot you'd found and separated out before it could reach anyone at all. 34 good barrels, sorted and prepared and now dressed elaborately in a rich sauce thick with spice, arranged on enormous platters garnished with herbs and gold leaf, carried up the stairs one after another. You watch each one pass with a specific, private relief that no one else in this crowded, frantic kitchen would understand or have time to care about, even if you tried to explain it. Somewhere up there, at the high table, a 9-year-old boy is about to eat fish that would have killed him slowly over days if you hadn't found the rot before dawn, on a morning that already feels like it belongs to another lifetime. Other dishes follow in a procession that seems to have no end, cranes dressed whole, their long necks curled artfully back over their bodies, herons prepared the same way, whole roasted peacocks in their reassembled plumage, tails fanned wide so lifelike from a distance that you understand now why Master Perrin guards his skinning technique so jealously. The illusion is the entire point. A dead bird made to look alive again through hours of patient, careful work that no one at the high table will ever think to notice or credit. There are dishes that turn your stomach a little even now, after 3 years in this kitchen and 3 days of increasingly strange preparation. Calves' feet jellied and set into elaborate shapes. Larks' tongues, dozens of them, no bigger than your smallest fingernail, arranged into a pattern on a small silver dish that took one of the senior cooks the better part of an afternoon to assemble. Brains, both calf and pig, whipped and seasoned and set into a pastry shell so delicate it barely holds its shape when the server lifts it. A dish of eels, still faintly twitching when they first arrived in the kitchen this morning, now stewed and presented in their own dark, glistening sauce. You've handled all of it at some point in the past 3 days, your hands moving through textures that would have made you gag on your first week in this kitchen, and now barely register as strange. The slick give of raw brains between your fingers, the rubbery resistance of eel flesh, the strange lightness of a lark's tongue, so small you can barely feel it resting in your palm, even though you know intellectually that it represents a whole small bird that gave its life for a single mouthful, destined for someone who probably won't even notice eating it among the dozens of other dishes crowding the table. The sugar castle arrives at the pass-through window sometime past the second remove, carried by 4 men who move with the exaggerated care of people transporting something both extremely valuable and extremely fragile. And you catch your breath as it passes, remembering the hairline crack near its base, the hidden brace Master Allard worked into the sugar paste the night before. It survives the journey from the confectionery to the pass-through without incident, its towers still standing, its painted colours still gleaming under the torchlight, and you allow yourself a small, private hope that the hardest part is over, that it only needs to survive one more journey now, up the stairs and across the hall to the high table itself. Master Allard himself accompanies it up the stairs, something you've never seen a master confectioner do for any dish before, walking directly behind the men carrying his creation, with his eyes fixed on its base the entire way, watching for any sign of movement, any hint that the crack might be widening under the strain of transport. You don't see what happens next. You're pulled back to your own station, more dishes waiting, more platters needing their garnish straightened, the endless rhythm of the feast continuing whether or not you have time to watch its most dramatic moments unfold. But word comes back down within minutes, passed from server to server, in the particular breathless way that news travels through a kitchen mid-service, and what you hear makes your stomach drop, even though the disaster, when it comes, isn't the one anyone was watching for. It isn't the sugar castle. The sugar castle, as it turns out, reaches the high table without incident, its hidden brace holding exactly as Master Allard intended, and when it's finally cut open before the assembled hall, the small birds inside it fly free exactly as planned. A startling flutter of wings over the high table that draws gasps and applause from the watching crowd. A triumph 3 days in the making, resolving itself in a matter of seconds that no one below stairs gets to properly witness or celebrate. The disaster, when it comes, is smaller and stranger and far more frightening, because it isn't about food at all. It's about the boy at the centre of everything, sitting beneath his canopy of state in robes, too heavy for his small frame, through a ceremony that's already lasted most of the day on top of a crowning that lasted most of the morning before it, and it's about what happens when a 9-year-old body, pushed past its limits in front of thousands of watching strangers, simply begins to fail. There are dishes that pass through your hands during that endless first hour of service that you still think about, years later, whenever anyone asks what a royal feast actually looks like from the inside, because they're never the dishes people imagine when they picture a king's table. A whole dish of stuffed pig's stomach arrives at the pass-through, packed tight with minced meat and dried fruit, and a dense mixture of breadcrumbs and spice. The stomach itself scrubbed and turned inside out and boiled until it holds its shape like a strange pale sack, and the smell of it, sweet dried fruit fighting against the unmistakable animal richness of the casing itself, makes the boy next to you gag quietly into his own shoulder before forcing himself back to work. There's a dish of umbles, the organ meats of the deer taken for the feast, the heart and liver and lights all chopped fine and baked into a pie with currants and heavy spice until the filling turns nearly black. A dish so far beneath the dignity of the high table that it never actually leaves the kitchen for the hall at all. It goes instead to the lower tables, to the household officers and lesser guests seated far from the king's own gaze. A sharp reminder, if you needed one, that even within a single feast there are a dozen different feasts happening at once, graded carefully by rank, with the finest cuts rising steadily toward the dais, and the roughest, strangest parts of every animal settling toward the bottom. You handle a tray of calves' tongues, boiled and skinned and sliced thin, arranged in an overlapping pattern like fish scales across a silver dish, and glazed with a sauce so sweet it borders on sickly, and your fingers, working quickly to straighten a slice that slipped out of line, come away smelling of boiled meat and sugar together in a combination that clings to your skin for the rest of the evening, no matter how many times you wipe your hands on your apron. The jellies are their own particular strangeness, built up in layered moulds until they emerge as elaborate architectural shapes, towers, animals, the king's own arms rendered in trembling translucent colour, red and gold and a deep green that Master Hobden tells you, in passing, comes from a costly dye ground from a particular imported route. They wobble alarmingly on their platters as they're carried past you, catching the torchlight in strange shivering flashes, and more than once during the long service a server nearly loses one entirely, only just steadying the tray in time to save both the dish and, quite possibly, his own position in the household. You catch a glimpse at one point of a dish being prepared that you've never seen before, and never see again in all your years in this kitchen afterward. A peacock and a pig, somehow joined at the middle by careful butchery and skillful sewing, so that from one end the platter appears to hold a magnificent bird, and from the other a roasted boar, a single grotesque and impressive creature meant to provoke exactly the reaction it provokes in you. A mixture of awe and faint nausea that you suspect is the entire point. The spiced wine, Hippocras, flows in a steady stream from the buttery throughout the whole long afternoon, thick with cinnamon and ginger and sugar enough to make your own mouth water, despite everything, though you never get so much as a taste of it yourself, watching, instead, as cup after cup is carried up the stairs toward a hall full of guests who'll drink more of it in a single afternoon than your entire kitchen staff would see in a month. By the time the second remove gives way to the third, You've stopped being surprised by anything that crosses the pass-through window. Your body settled into the same numb, mechanical rhythm that carried you through 3 days of preparation, wiping and arranging and passing dishes forward without really registering anymore just how strange or how grand each one actually is. It's only much later, lying exhausted in your loft or years afterward, telling the story to a green new scullion like Davy, that the sheer accumulated strangeness of it all comes back to you properly. Stuffed stomachs and gilded tusks and sugar castles with live birds hidden inside them. An entire kingdom's wealth and craft poured into feeding a 9-year-old boy who, as you'll learn only a few hours later, can barely manage to keep himself upright long enough to be seen eating any of it at all. You're at the pass-through window wiping a smear of sauce from the rim of a silver dish when a steward you've never seen before burst through the kitchen doors at a dead run, his face grey, his voice pitched too high with panic to carry properly over the roar of the kitchen. Water. Plain water. Cold now, and something a child can keep down. Broth. Bread soaked soft. Anything. And quiet about it. For the love of God. Quiet. Master Hobden is at his side within seconds, the way he always seems to materialise wherever the crisis is worst, and you watch the steward lean close to speak into his ear, too fast and too low for you to catch more than fragments. Something about the high table. Something about the king. Something about not wanting the hall to see. You're close enough to the pass-through, and small enough and quick enough on your feet that Master Hobden's eyes land on you before he's finished hearing the steward's whispered explanation. Sharp. Cold water, a cup, now. Go with him. You don't ask questions. You grab a pewter cup, fill it fast from the barrel kept for exactly this kind of emergency, and follow the steward at a run, up the narrow stone stairs you've carried 100 dishes through over the past hour, out through a side passage you've never used before, and suddenly, without any transition you have time to process, you're standing at the edge of Westminster Hall itself, looking in. The scale of it hits you even in the middle of your panic, even with a cup of water sloshing in your grip and a steward pulling you forward by the sleeve. Thousands of people, tables stretching farther than you can see clearly in either direction, torchlight and candlelight throwing a warm golden haze up toward that impossibly high painted ceiling. The noise of thousands of conversations rolling together into something like the roar of the sea, and at the far end, raised above everyone else beneath a canopy of gold cloth, the high table, where you can just make out a small figure slumped sideways in a chair too large for him, held upright by the quick hands of the men flanking him. The steward doesn't take you all the way to the high table. He can't. The crowd of lords and attendants already gathered around the boy king is too dense, and a scullery boy with sauce stains on his apron has no business anywhere near that inner circle. Instead, he pulls you to the edge of a service passage that runs along the side of the dais, close enough that you can see through gaps in the crowd, and thrusts the cup toward a physician you recognize by his robes, if not his face. A man crouched at the king's side with 2 fingers pressed against the boy's throat, checking the pulse there. For one long, suspended moment, close enough now to actually see him clearly for the first time all day, you watch Edward, King of England, not as a symbol or a story or a boy glimpsed from a crowded street, but as exactly what he is, a 9-year-old child, pale as the linen on the table in front of him, sweat beading along his hairline despite the cold of the hall, his eyes half open and unfocused, his small hands trembling faintly where they rest against the arms of his chair. He's been awake since before dawn, He's stood and knelt and been anointed and crowned through hours of ceremony in a stone abbey without heating, dressed the entire time in robes so heavy that 2 men had to help him simply rise from his knees, and then carried straight from that into a feast that's already lasted through 2 full courses of a meal that will run, everyone below stairs has been told, to at least 6. His body has simply run out of whatever a 9-year-old body has to give. The physician takes the water from your shaking hand without acknowledging you exist, tilts a few drops carefully between the boy's lips, watches his throat move as he swallows. Around them, the great lords of the realm are doing an extraordinary, delicate dance of concealment, closing ranks, adjusting their own postures to block the high table from the view of the hall below, someone calling in a loud, carrying voice for musicians to strike up a fresh piece, as though this were simply a planned interlude in the entertainment, someone else signalling for the next course to be brought forward with unusual speed, anything to keep several thousand pairs of eyes occupied elsewhere for the handful of minutes this crisis needs to pass. You understand, standing frozen at the edge of the service passage with an empty cup still in your hand, exactly what Piers meant 2 nights ago in the passage outside the scullery. It's not really about feeding him. It's about what the room sees, what gets written down, what gets carried back in letters to Paris and Madrid and Brussels describing the young English king's coronation feast. A child fainting at his own crowning banquet is not a story anyone in that circle of lords intends to let exist. Not today. Not if there's any way at all to prevent it. The boy's eyes flutter fully open. He blinks up at the physician, at the ring of concerned faces bent over him, and you watch something pass across his face that you recognize immediately because you've felt the exact same thing yourself more than once over the past 3 exhausting days. The specific, private horror of realizing you've shown weakness in front of people who needed you not to. "I'm well," he says, and his voice is thin and a little unsteady, but perfectly clear in the small pocket of relative quiet around the high table. "I only needed air. I'm well." Nobody around him looks like they believe it, but nobody contradicts him either, because contradicting a crowned king, even one who is 9 years old and visibly shaking, is not something anyone in that circle of nobles is prepared to do in the middle of his own coronation banquet. The physician exchanges a look with one of the older lords. You think it might be the Duke of Somerset himself, the Lord Protector, though you've never seen him up close before and can't be entirely certain. And something unspoken passes between them, a decision made without words. "His Majesty will take a little broth," the physician announces, pitching his voice for the benefit of anyone close enough to overhear, "before the next course, a private moment only." And just like that, the machinery of concealment shifts into its next gear. A curtain that you hadn't noticed, hung along part of the dais for exactly this kind of contingency, is drawn partway across, screening the high table's centre from at least some angles of view. Servers appear with fresh dishes for the tables nearest the dais, drawing attention outward and downward rather than up toward the king. The musicians, somewhere unseen, launch into something bright and fast, a tune with enough energy to draw ears and eyes away from whatever might be happening behind the drawn curtain. You're still standing there, forgotten, empty cup in hand, when the steward who brought you finally remembers your existence and grabs your shoulder, hauling you backward, away from the service passage, back toward the stairs and the kitchen and the world you actually belong to. "You saw nothing," he says, low and urgent, his fingers digging into your shoulder hard enough to bruise. "Do you understand me, boy? Whatever you think you saw up there, you saw nothing. Nobody fainted. Nobody was ill. The king asked for air, and now he has broth, and that is the entire story, from now until you die. Do you understand? You nod. You understand perfectly. You've understood in some form since your very first week in this kitchen that there are two versions of every event that happens in a place like this. The version that actually occurs, witnessed by exhausted, invisible people like you, and the version that gets told afterward, polished and controlled by people whose job it is to make sure the crown never looks fragile in front of anyone who matters. You've simply never before been close enough to see the gap between those two versions with your own eyes. The steward releases you at the top of the kitchen stairs, already turning back toward the hall, already moving on to the next crisis in a day that seems determined to produce them endlessly, and you stand there for a moment on the narrow stone steps, your heart still hammering. The memory of that pale, trembling, defiant small face fixed behind your eyes in a way you know isn't going to fade quickly. Then you go back down into the noise and heat of the kitchen, because there's still a feast to serve, and no one down here has time to wait for you to recover from what you've just seen. The kitchen swallows you back into its rhythm the moment you step through the door, and for a while there's no room in your head for anything except the work directly in front of you. More dishes to wipe clean, more platters to arrange. The third course is already moving, and then the fourth, spiced meats and elaborate pies and more of the small, strange delicacies that have made up so much of this feast. Candied fruits arranged into shapes meant to represent the arms of England and of Wales and of the king's own household. A whole dish given over to nothing but gilded almonds. Another to spun sugar birds so delicate that two of them shatter during the short walk from the confectionery to the pass-through and have to be hastily replaced from a small reserve batch Master Allard had the foresight to keep back. You don't tell anyone what you saw. The steward's grip on your shoulder, the low urgency of his warning, is still fresh enough that the idea of speaking about it out loud doesn't even occur to you as something you might do. But it sits inside you anyway, a small hard knowledge lodged somewhere behind your ribs, not unlike the spoon still tucked into your apron pocket. Another secret you're carrying that isn't quite yours to carry, another thing you've seen that you're not supposed to have seen. It's during a brief lull, somewhere past the fifth course, when the kitchen's pace finally eases enough for you to catch your breath, properly for the first time in hours, that Master Hobden finds you again, this time not to give an order, but simply to check, in his own gruff way, that you're still standing. "You went up," he says. "It's not a question." "Yes, sir." He studies your face for a long moment, and you have the uncomfortable sense that he can read exactly what happened up there, without you needing to say a word of it, the way he seems to read most things in this kitchen. "Whatever you saw," he says finally, "stays inside you, not because anyone's told you to keep quiet, though I expect someone already has, but because a boy who runs his mouth about what he sees in places like this doesn't stay employed in kitchens like this. You understand the difference?" "I think so, sir." "Good." He turns to go, then pauses, glancing back at you with an expression you can't quite name. "He's a child, you know. Whatever they dress him in, whatever they put on his head. Same as you were a child 3 years ago when you first came through that door half-starved and green as grass. Don't forget that, whatever else you're told to forget." He walks away before you can answer, already absorbed back into the endless demands of the evening, and you stand there for a moment with his words settling over you, feeling the truth of them land somewhere deeper than you expected. It's that small, unexpected kindness, Master Hobden of all people, offering you something close to comfort in the middle of the worst week of your working life that finally pushes you to deal with the spoon. You find him again 20 minutes later during another brief lull, and you draw it out from your apron pocket before you can talk yourself out of it, holding it out on your open palm the way you might offer food to a dog you weren't sure would bite. "I found this, sir, in the wet larder 2 nights past. It's not kitchen silver. I should have handed it in straight away. I didn't." Master Hobden looks at the spoon, then at you, and for a moment you're certain he's about to be angry, that the exhausted goodwill of a few minutes ago is about to curdle into the kind of fury you've seen him direct at boys who've made far smaller mistakes than a 3-day theft of royal silver. Instead, he takes the spoon from your palm, turns it over once in his thick fingers, and sighs. A long, tired exhale that seems to carry the weight of the entire week behind it. "This belongs to the almoner's plate," he says, dropped by some steward carrying more than he could manage through a passage too narrow for the load. "It's been missed. There's been a quiet fuss about it since yesterday morning. Nothing that's reached the king's ears, thank God, but fuss enough among the household officers, wondering whether some thief's made off with royal silver on the very eve of the coronation." Your stomach drops all over again, a fresh cold wave of realization at just how much larger this small theft might have become if you'd waited even one more day to confess it. "I'm sorry, sir, I meant to hand it in. There wasn't a quiet moment, and then I was afraid of what would happen if you'd handed it in straight away, boy. Nothing would have happened except a nod and maybe a farthing for your honesty," Master Hobden says. "Now you've held on to stolen royal plate through the coronation of a king, and that's a different matter entirely, whatever your reasons." He looks at the spoon again, then back at you, and something in his expression softens slightly. "But you brought it to me before I asked. That counts for something. It counts for quite a lot, actually, given what I know of most boys your age and what they'd have done with a bit of silver small enough to hide and valuable enough to sell." "I wasn't going to sell it, sir. I believe you, which is precisely why I'm not going to report exactly how it was found, or by whom, or how long it sat in a scullion's apron pocket before it turned up." He tucks the spoon into his own coat, out of sight. "I'll return it myself quietly, as though I found it in the confusion of the past few days, which, in a manner of speaking, I have. You'll say nothing further about it to me or to anyone else, and you'll consider this the one and only mercy I extend to any boy under my authority for holding back honesty when it was owed. Are we understood?" "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. Get back to your station. There's still a feast happening above our heads, and it isn't going to serve itself." You return to the pass-through window with your hands feeling strangely lighter, the small cold weight of the spoon gone from your ribs, replaced by something that isn't quite relief and isn't quite shame but sits somewhere close to both. A lesson you suspect you'll carry longer than the guilt itself. The feast grinds on through the afternoon and into the evening, course after course, the kitchen's frantic energy slowly giving way to something more like grim endurance as the hours accumulate and everyone's reserves run lower. You lose count of how many dishes pass through your hands. You lose track at some point of how many hours you've been standing, your feet gone numb inside boots that have been wet more than once today, with spilled sauce and melted ice from the fish barrels, your raw hands stinging with every new platter you handle. Word filters back down through the kitchen, piece by piece, of what's happening above. The final course arrives, and with it the elaborate ceremonial subtleties meant purely for display rather than eating. Sugar sculptures depicting the king's own arms, a marchpane model of Westminster Abbey itself so detailed that someone claims you can make out individual carved figures on its tiny facade. Speeches are given, toasts are drunk. The hall, by every account reaching the kitchen, remains entirely unaware that anything went wrong at the high table earlier in the afternoon, the curtain and the broth, and the bright, fast music having done exactly what they were meant to do. You think, more than once during those long final hours of service, about the boy behind that curtain, forcing himself upright, forcing his voice steady, saying, "I'm well to a circle of grown men who needed him to say exactly that, whether or not it was true." You think about how tired you are, standing at a pass-through window with the freedom to lean against the wall between deliveries, to mutter a complaint to the boy beside you, to know that your exhaustion, however severe, ends when this feast ends and doesn't need to be hidden from anyone. The boy king doesn't have that freedom. He never will. Not for as long as he wears that crown. His exhaustion has to be managed, concealed, converted into a story about wanting air rather than a story about a child's body failing under an adult world's demands. You're not sure, turning the thought over while your hands continue their automatic work of wiping and arranging and passing dishes forward, whether that makes him luckier than you or considerably less lucky. You suspect, the longer you think about it, that it's simply a different kind of hard, dressed in gold and silk instead of feathers and fish scale, but no less heavy for the difference. The feast finally ends somewhere past 9 in the evening. The last course cleared, the last toast drunk, the great hall above slowly emptying of its thousands of guests out into a London night that's turned properly cold under a clear sky thick with stars. Down in the kitchen, the news reaches you the way most news reaches you, second-hand shouted from one exhausted worker to another, met with a ragged cheer that has almost nothing to do with celebration and almost everything to do with relief. But the work doesn't end when the feast does. If anything, a new kind of labour begins the moment the last dish is cleared from the high table. An entire kitchen's worth of pots and platters and cauldrons and serving dishes, thousands of pieces of silver and pewter and earthenware, all of it needing to be gathered, scraped, washed, and accounted for before anyone is permitted to sleep. You're set to the washing, which after 3 days of cooking and carrying feels almost restful despite the sheer volume of it. Your hands submerged in water gone grey and greasy within the first hour, scrubbing at dishes crusted with sauce and grease and the residue of 100 different courses. The water is cold. There isn't fuel or time left to keep it properly heated for washing when every fire in the kitchen has spent the day roasting and boiling for the feast itself. And your raw, cracked hands sting fiercely every time you plunge them back in. But you keep working because everyone around you is doing exactly the same thing. And stopping before the job is finished isn't something anyone in this kitchen considers an option. Piers ends up beside you at the long washing trough sometime past 10, his own hands as raw as yours, his face streaked with the particular grey exhaustion that comes from a day spent almost entirely on your feet in front of open flame. "Heard something happened up top," he says quietly, not quite looking at you, his hand still moving through the dishwater. "Something with the king." You hesitate, Master Hobden's warning still fresh in your ears, the steward's grip still an ache in your shoulder if you press on it. But Piers isn't the wider world. Piers is the boy who shared his stolen marchpane with you 2 nights ago, and told you the truth about a sugar castle, staking a man's whole career on its own structural integrity. And something in you decides, in this moment, that some secrets are meant to be shared with exactly one other exhausted person and no one else. He fainted, you say, very quietly, barely above the sound of the water sloshing between you. Or nearly did. I saw it. I'm not to speak of it. Piers is quiet for a moment, scrubbing at a pewter platter with more force than the job strictly requires. Makes sense, he says finally. Standing since before dawn, crowned in a stone church cold enough to freeze the marrow, then sat through 6 courses of a feast that's more show than supper. He's smaller than half the boys work in this kitchen tonight, and none of us have had to sit still and smile through all of it in front of half of Europe. He said he was well, said it right in front of everyone like he could make it true just by saying it. That's kings for you, I suppose. Piers glances sideways at you, something wry in his exhausted expression. Or maybe that's just what everyone does when enough people are watching and failing isn't allowed. You didn't cry over that fish 2 mornings back, did you? Even though I'd wager you wanted to. You think about that. About standing in the cold dark of the wet larder with a rotten fish in each hand. About the particular effort it took to keep your voice steady when Master Hobden arrived to find out what you'd discovered. You hadn't thought of it at the time as the same kind of performance the boy king was giving today behind his curtain, but turned over in your tired mind now, in the cold grey dishwater with Piers beside you, it doesn't feel quite so different after all. A boy holding himself together because falling apart wasn't an option, whatever crown he did or didn't wear while he did it. I suppose not, you say. You work in companionable silence after that, the two of you making steady progress through the mountain of dishes still waiting, the kitchen around you slowly quieting as more and more workers finish their own portions of the clean-up and stumble off toward whatever sleep they can find before tomorrow's ordinary demands begin again. The great fires have died down to banked coals, throwing a dim orange glow across the room instead of the roaring blaze of earlier, and the air, though still thick with the mingled smell of 3 days of cooking, has cooled enough that you can finally breathe without feeling the heat pressing against your face. Master Hobden makes one final round through the kitchen sometime near midnight, checking that the essential work has been done, that nothing perishable has been left out to spoil overnight, that the fires are properly banked and safe to leave unattended until morning. He pauses near you and Piers on his way through, taking in the state of the washing trough, the diminishing stack of dishes still needing attention. Good enough, he says. Finish what's in front of you and get to bed. Tomorrow's an ordinary day, God willing, and you'll both be no use to me if you're dead on your feet by noon. An ordinary day. The words land strangely after 3 days that felt like anything but ordinary, and you find yourself almost unable to picture what tomorrow will actually look like. No fish to sort in the dark, no swans to pluck by the dozen, no sugar castle balanced on the edge of collapse, just the normal, unremarkable rhythm of a royal kitchen, feeding a much smaller number of people their much smaller, much less consequential daily meals. You finish the last of the dishes in front of you with Piers, the two of you working in a silence that's gone past exhaustion into something almost peaceful. The kind of tiredness that settles into your bones rather than fighting against them, and when you finally climb the stairs toward the loft above the boiling house, your legs barely holding you upright, you pass other boys already collapsed on their pallets, some of them still in their aprons, too tired even to undress before sleep claimed them. You lie down on your own pallet without bothering to change, the way you did the night before, and for a moment, before sleep pulls you under entirely, you find yourself thinking about the strange shape of the past 3 days, the rotten fish and the raw hands and the sugar castle's hidden brace and the small stolen spoon, and the boy king's trembling voice, insisting he was well when he plainly wasn't. All of it feels, in this last drowsy moment before sleep takes you, like pieces of the same larger truth, that everything grand and gleaming and impossible to look away from is held up, always, by something smaller and more fragile working hard and mostly unseen underneath it. Sleep comes for you quickly after that, deep and dreamless, the kind of sleep that only 3 days of that particular exhaustion can earn a person. And outside, beyond the thick stone walls of the kitchen and the loft above it, London settles slowly into its own late-night quiet. A city that watched a boy become a king today, and that will, tomorrow, largely go back to the ordinary business of living, the way cities always do once the pageantry has passed and the work of actually running a kingdom, or a kitchen, or a life, begins again in earnest. The days that follow the coronation feast do return to something like ordinary, though it takes longer than you expect for your body to believe it. For nearly a week afterward you wake before dawn out of the old habit, lying tense on your pallet in the dark, waiting for a hand to shake your shoulder and tell you there's no time for bread, before you remember that the crisis has passed, that today only asks the usual things of you rather than the impossible ones. Your hands heal slowly. The cracks across your knuckles close over. The burns fade to pale marks that will stay with you, you suspect, for years rather than weeks. Small permanent souvenirs of 3 days that nearly broke you and somehow didn't. Master Hobden never mentions the spoon again, and neither do you, though you notice a few days after the feast that the fuss among the household officers about missing Almoner's silver has quietly died away. No explanation offered, no boy blamed. A small mercy folded into the much larger machinery of a royal household that has already moved on to its next set of concerns. You think sometimes in the quiet moments a kitchen occasionally allows even a scullion about what you saw at the edge of that service passage. The small, pale, trembling figure behind the drawn curtain. The thin, unsteady voice insisting I'm well to a circle of men who needed exactly that lie. You never speak of it again after that one quiet confession to peers over the washing trough, but you carry it with you, a private piece of knowledge that colours, without your fully realising it at first, the way you think about the boy whose face appears on coins and proclamations and the occasional woodcut sold in printers' windows. Spring comes to London slowly that year, the way it always does, mud giving way gradually to green, the Thames running high and cold with melting snow from somewhere upriver, and the kitchen's rhythms settle back into their ordinary shape. Daily meals for the king's household, smaller feasts for smaller occasions, the steady, unglamorous work that makes up the vast majority of a scullion's year compared to the handful of days like the coronation that everyone remembers afterward. You're given more responsibility as the months pass, small increases in trust that come without ceremony or announcement, simply a gradual shift in which tasks Master Hobden assigns you without needing to check the results himself afterward. By summer you're overseeing the wet larder's daily deliveries rather than merely sorting them, catching problems. A supplier trying to pass off yesterday's catch as this morning's a barrel packed with ice that's already half melted, before they become the kind of crisis that nearly caught you unprepared before the coronation. Piers finishes his own apprenticeship faster than you do, being older, and moves up to a position among the junior cooks proper, no longer plucking swans or grinding spice, but beginning to learn the actual composition of sauces and the timing of roasts, the beginning of a trade that will, if he stays steady and careful, eventually let him call himself a master in his own right. You miss his company in the scullery passages more than you expect to, though you still find him most evenings, sharing whatever scraps the day has left over, trading news of the household the way you always have. The kingdom around you, meanwhile, settles into its own new shape under the boy king and the uncle who governs in his name. You hear pieces of it the way kitchen workers always hear the larger news of the realm, filtered through servants and stewards and the occasional visiting merchant, fragments of policy and conflict that mean little to you directly, but that shape, in ways you only half understand, the mood of the household above you. The Lord Protector pushes changes in how the kingdom worships that stir up more argument than agreement in some quarters. There is talk, more than once over the following months, of unrest in the countryside, of harvests and rents and grievances that never quite reach your ears in full, but that you gather, from the careful faces of the men who do hear the full accounts, are serious enough to worry people who don't usually worry about much beyond the next delivery of fish. Through all of it, the boy king himself remains, to you, mostly a distant figure again, glimpsed occasionally at a remove during some procession or ceremony, never again as close as that single, terrible, revealing moment beside the high table on the day of his coronation. You watch him grow over the years that follow, the way the whole kingdom watches him grow, through proclamations and portraits and the second-hand reports of people who do serve close enough to see him properly. Taller each year, more serious if anything rather than less, said by those who know him to be sharp-minded and devoted to his studies, in a way that seems, to you, like another kind of performance almost as demanding as the one you witnessed him give behind that curtain, a boy determined to prove himself equal to a crown that landed on his head years before. Most children have learned to tie their own shoes properly. You rise over the years through the kitchen's own slow hierarchy, the way every boy who survives long enough eventually does. By the time you're old enough to be called something other than a scullion, a junior cook in your own right, with a boy or two of your own to direct through the same brutal essential labour you once performed yourself, you've served through half a dozen more feasts of varying scale, though none quite so vast or quite so frightening as that first coronation, and you've learned in the process exactly the lesson Master Hobden tried to teach you that first exhausted night with the spoon in your palm, that the difference between disaster and success in a kitchen like this one is rarely talent alone. More often it's the willingness to notice a small wrongness before it becomes a large one, and the honesty to say so, even when saying so is frightening. You think of him often. That boy Master Hobden reminded you not to forget was still a child underneath the crown. More often, if you're honest with yourself, than you think about most of the other events that have crowded your years since. You hear, eventually, years later, of his death. Still a boy by most reckonings, barely more than a young man, taken by a wasting sickness that no physician's skill could turn back. The crown passing on to hands that will fight bitterly over it in the months that follow, the whole uneasy machinery of succession grinding forward the way it always does when a young king dies before he's had the chance to properly become an old one. You remember hearing that news second-hand in a kitchen that has, by then, become entirely your own to run, the small trembling figure behind the curtain on the day of his coronation, insisting through a mouth gone dry with exhaustion that he was well. You think, standing in your own kitchen years later with your own scullions bent over their own basins of cold water, about how young he was that day, and how young he stayed, in the end, for the whole short span of his reign, a boy asked from the very first hour of his crowning to carry a weight that would have buckled grown men, and who somehow mostly carried it anyway. right up until his body finally refused to carry it any further. There's a boy in your kitchen now. Your own kitchen, the king's kitchen still, though the king himself has changed twice more since that cold February morning when you first found rot in the dark, who reminds you, more than you'd like to admit, of yourself at 13. Thin-wristed, hollow-eyed from a first week of labour his body hasn't yet learned to survive, flinching at every shouted order the way you once flinched, though he's learning fast not to show it. His name is Davy, and he comes from a fishing village on the Kent coast, sent to London by a father who couldn't feed 6 children on what the sea gave him, and decided one fewer mouth was worth more than one more pair of hands. You recognise the particular hunger in him, not just for food, though there's plenty of that too in a boy his age doing a full day's kitchen labour for the first time, but the deeper hunger to prove himself worth the space he takes up, to earn, through raw effort, some claimed belonging in a place that owes him nothing and has made that fact perfectly clear from his very first hour. You catch him, one evening in early autumn, sitting alone in the scullery passage after his work is done, staring at nothing in particular. His hands, already, after only a few weeks, beginning to show the same small cuts and burns yours carried for years, resting loose and exhausted in his lap. First month's the worst, you tell him, settling down against the wall a few feet away, close enough for conversation but not so close as to crowd him. It gets easier, not because the work gets lighter, because you get stronger than the work is heavy. He looks at you like he doesn't quite believe it, which is fair because you didn't quite believe it either. The first time someone told you something similar, more years ago now than you sometimes feel comfortable counting. Is it always like this? He asks. The shouting and the... He gestures vaguely at his own raw hands, at the general exhaustion written across every inch of him. Not always this hard, you say, but it's never really easy. You just learn what to expect, and knowing what to expect makes it easier to bear, even when the thing itself doesn't change. You think for a moment about how to explain the rest of it, the strange pride that comes from surviving a brutal apprenticeship, the specific satisfaction of a task done well, even when no one above stairs will ever know your name or your part in it. You'll have days that feel impossible. I had one, my first spring here, 3 days running with barely any sleep, feeding a coronation feast for a boy king who was younger, near enough, than you are now. Thought I might die of it, honestly. Or at least that I wanted to. What happened? I survived it. We all did. That whole kitchen full of exhausted boys and men. And afterward it turned out I'd learned things I didn't know I was learning while it was happening. How to catch a problem before it becomes a disaster. How to hold steady when everything around you is falling apart. How much a body can actually endure when it has to. You glance sideways at him, at the raw new cuts on his hands, at the exhaustion he's trying and mostly failing to hide. You're learning those same things right now, whether it feels like it or not. He doesn't say much in response, but something in his posture eases slightly. The particular tension of a boy convinced he's failing at something. Everyone else finds easy loosening just a fraction, and you sit with him a while longer in the quiet of the passage before sending him off to sleep, the way someone once, in a manner of speaking, sent you off to your own rest during your own hardest early days here. Later that same evening, once your own duties are finally finished, you climb the narrow stairs that lead up onto a section of the palace roof where the kitchen staff are permitted on quiet nights to take the air, a habit you picked up years ago from an older cook who first showed you the spot, and one you've kept ever since, a small private ritual that has nothing to do with duty and everything to do with simply remembering, once in a while, that the world extends beyond the walls you spend most of your waking hours inside. London spreads out below you in the fading light, chimney smoke rising in thin grey threads from 1,000 rooftops. The Thames catching the last colour of the sunset in a long silver ribbon that curves away toward the sea. Somewhere out there, beyond the rooftops and the church towers, is the whole rest of the kingdom. Fields and villages and other cities you've never seen and likely never will, all of it connected, in ways you understand better now than you did as a green 13-year-old, by the same threads of commerce and labour and quiet, unglamorous effort that keep a kitchen like yours running day after day. You think, standing there in the cooling evening air, about how much has changed since that first coronation, and how much, underneath the changes, has stayed exactly the same. Different king, different fires burning in the great hearths below you, different boys like Davy, arriving green and frightened to be shaped, slowly and often painfully, into something capable of the work this palace demands. But the fundamental truth of it, the truth Master Hobden tried to teach you with a spoon in your palm all those years ago, the truth you're trying, however clumsily, to pass along to Davy tonight, remains exactly what it was. Whatever grand and gleaming thing sits at the centre of a kingdom, whatever crown, whatever feast, whatever face gets pressed onto a coin or painted onto a portrait meant to hang in a great hall for centuries, it's held up by hands like yours. Hands that go mostly unnamed, mostly unthanked, mostly invisible to the very people they serve, and that keep working anyway, night after night, season after season, because the alternative, letting the whole fragile, glittering structure fall, was never really a choice at all. But the wind picks up slightly, carrying with it the mingled smells of the city below. Wood smoke and river mud and the faint familiar tang of 100 different kitchens, all cooking their own version of supper at the same hour, and you stand there a while longer, letting the day's exhaustion settle into something more like peace, before finally turning back toward the stairs, toward your own bed, toward whatever tomorrow's ordinary demands turn out to be. Your own bed, when you finally reach it, is nothing like the thin straw pallet you slept on as a boy in the loft above the boiling house. Years of steady work have earned you a proper room now, small but yours alone, a real mattress stuffed with wool rather than straw, a single narrow window that lets in a slice of night sky if you angle your head just right against the pillow. You lie down slowly, the particular ache of a long day settling into your shoulders and your lower back the way it always does now, a different ache than the raw, burning exhaustion of your first years here, but no less real for being quieter, more familiar, worn smooth at the edges by long acquaintance. Your hands rest on top of the blanket, and in the dim light you can just make out the faint pale lines across your knuckles, old scars from old burns and old cuts, a map of every difficult night this kitchen has ever asked of you, written directly into your own skin. You think, drifting toward sleep, about the boy king one more time, the way you sometimes do on quiet nights like this one, though the sharpness of that memory has softened over the years into something gentler, more like a story you're telling yourself than a wound still raw enough to sting. A small pale face behind a half-drawn curtain, a thin voice insisting I'm well when it plainly wasn't true, a whole hall of thousands, and a whole kingdom beyond it, kept carefully, deliberately unaware of exactly how much that single small body had been asked to carry on the very first day anyone ever asked it to carry anything at all. You think about Davy, sleeping somewhere below you in the same loft you once slept in yourself, his raw new hands curled loosely against his chest the way yours once did, his body slowly, painfully learning what yours learned years before him, that a person can be asked to carry more than seems possible, and can somehow, against all expectation, find a way to carry it anyway. You think about Master Hobden, gone now these past few years, buried in a quiet churchyard not far from the palace, a man who taught you more about honesty and quiet competence in one exhausted midnight conversation over a stolen spoon than most people learn in a lifetime of gentler lessons. You think about Piers, a master cook in his own household now, with his own boys learning his own particular rhythms of sauce and roast and careful, patient craft. You think about the fish, the swans, the sugar castle with its hidden brace, all of it folded now into memory, softened and smoothed the way memory always smooths the sharp edges of things once enough time has passed over them. You are tired enough in this moment and warm enough and settled enough that the difference between all of that and simple peace has become difficult to locate. You're tired enough, warm enough, safe enough in this small room that is entirely your own, with a door that closes and a window that shows a slice of sky, and a bed that holds your body without complaint after a long day's honest work. That's enough. It has always, in the end, been enough. Let it come then. Let sleep take you the way it took a frightened 13-year-old boy in a straw loft above the boiling house all those years ago, and the way it will take Davy tonight, somewhere below you, and the way it eventually took a boy king who never got the chance to grow old carrying his own particular weight. Let the ache in your shoulders fade. Let the memory of the day's small labours, a sauce checked for scorching, a delivery inspected for freshness, a frightened new boy talk gently through his first hard month, settle and blur and finally go quiet. Let your thoughts slow and soften and stop reaching for the next task, the next worry, the next small crisis that tomorrow will inevitably bring. Tomorrow there will be fires to light before dawn. Tomorrow there will be fish to inspect and bread to portion, and a boy or two who need reminding that the work that feels impossible today will feel merely difficult by next month, and only a memory by next year. Tomorrow there will be another ordinary day in a kitchen that has fed 3 different monarchs across your own working life, and will, in all likelihood, feed several more before it's finished with you entirely. But that's tomorrow. Right now there's only this. The quiet weight of a wool blanket, the faint whisper of wind against a narrow window, the last dim edge of consciousness before sleep finally, fully claims you. Centuries will pass, long after you and Davy and every other name in this kitchen have been forgotten entirely, and the palace above these old stone kitchens will change beyond anything you could presently imagine. The fires that roared for a boy king's coronation feast will go cold, be rebuilt, go cold again. The great hall where thousands once watched a 9-year-old hold himself upright through sheer stubborn will shall stand through wars and fires and centuries of different feasts for different faces wearing the same crown, generation after generation, each one certain, in its own moment, that its particular grandeur will last forever. But somewhere, always, in kitchens not so different from this one, there will be a boy with raw hands and an aching back, learning the same hard lessons you learned. That honesty costs less than concealment in the long run. That a small wrongness caught early is worth more than any amount of talent applied too late. that the grandest, most gleaming things in any kingdom are always held up by someone smaller and more tired than anyone watching from the high table ever bothers to notice. Some things don't change. The particular ache of a body pushed past what it thought it could bear, and the particular pride of discovering it could bear it after all, that doesn't change. The quiet kindness of one exhausted person telling another exhausted person that it gets easier, even when both of them know it isn't entirely true, that doesn't change either. So let it come. Let the last of the day's noise fade beneath you, the way the coronation bells faded years ago into ordinary silence, the way every loud, frightening, impossible day eventually settles into something you can simply remember rather than something you have to survive all over again. Let your breathing slow. Let your hands raw and scarred, and finally, blessedly still, rest quiet against the blanket. You've earned this rest, same as every tired hand that ever held up something larger than itself, and asked for nothing in return but a few hours of quiet at the end of a long, hard day. Take it. Good night.